Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are delving through the profile of Chris Brazzell II, and so we're going to be discussing his profile, usage, some box scores against ranked competition, some advanced stats. I'm going to show you some all-22 cut-ups while I read a synopsis of his strengths and weaknesses. We're going to talk about IRL draft capital, as well as a couple of potential team fits based on this IRL projection, and then finally what we might be able to expect from him in fantasy. Now, I'm going to warn you ahead of this video, he is going to be one of my guys in this draft, so I'm just going to let you know I am very high on this player. And when we get into his height and weight, both PFF and NFL Draft Buzz have him listed at 6'5" and 200 pounds. Now, being 6'5" would be 94th percentile. But listen, like Stephen A. Smith said, we don't care about whether he ends up being, exactly 6'5" or 6'4". This guy will have a distinct height advantage against opposing players in the NFL, almost assuredly. And being 200 pounds would be 46th percentile. He could stand to add a little bit of weight, a little bit of muscle, but he's definitely not terribly skinny to the point where I would be worried about him getting pushed around all over the field or anything. And now NFL Draft Buzz has him listed as running a projected 4.48, which would be 59th percentile. Now, I don't really so much care about the exact 40-yard dash time, but I think he's going to beat that number pretty handily. I think he's going to run low 4.4s. But more importantly, his IRL game speed is way more than adequate for somebody his size, and you're going to see that on the all-22 film. Now let's go through his production profile. He is going to be a redshirt junior. Now, his four-year career is a little bit different than some other players, and that the reason why I think it's taken him up to this point is because he, in his first season, did deal with a shoulder injury that caused him to miss basically the entirety of the season. You'll notice he only put up 3 targets, 1 reception, 11 yards, and no touchdowns, to go along with the PFF receiving grade of 66.1, which is such a small sample size that doesn't really mean much to me, but did come on strong in 2023 at Tulane, had 68 targets, 44 receptions, 711 receiving yards, and 5 receiving touchdowns, to go along with what at the time was a career best PFF receiving grade of 77.2. Then transferred to Tennessee. First year, he was splitting time with, like Dante Thornton, for instance, who has not really worked out as well at the NFL level, but, did have ridiculous size and speed and was a huge vertical threat for the Volunteers. And so, he put up 58 targets, 29 receptions, 333 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns. Not a tremendous counting stats type of season, but this season has really come on strong and posted 88 targets, 61 receptions, 1,006 receiving yards, and 9 receiving touchdowns to go along with what is now a career best PFF grade of 80.1. This guy really took a huge step, and we're going to get into some of his strengths and weaknesses here in a little bit, but I think there is a lot to like about this guy. Now, we're going to take a look at some box scores here. Now, we're not going to be purely box score watching. We're going to get into some advanced stats here in a little bit. But I like to look at how these guys play against ranked competition. Do they get erased? Do they consistently dominate? Is a little bit fluky? Well, one thing I will say is he does not get erased in big games. As you can see against number 6 at the time, Georgia, posted 6 for 177 yards and 3 receiving touchdowns, an absolutely dominant game. Then against, at the time, number 6 ranked Alabama, went 7 for 66 and no touchdown. Not a remarkable game from a counting stats perspective, but definitely not erased and still a decent part of the offense. Same thing against number 18 Oklahoma, 6 receptions for 68 yards and no touchdown there. And then against number 14 Vanderbilt, went 6 for 91 and a touchdown on November 29th. And so one thing I really like, and is a positive thing in my opinion about his profile, is that he does not get erased in games against solid to elite competition at the collegiate level. And that is going to be something that I really value with prospects. How do you perform when it matters the most? And he really did step up. Moving on to his advanced stats, I took a look at FBS wide receivers with 50 or more targets. That was a sample size of over 200 players here. Brazzell ran 392 routes, which is 92.5% of the team routes. He is a starting wide receiver for the Volunteers. Now, one thing you'll hear me mention a lot is that the profile of the boundary-only wide receiver is typically the worst bet for us in fantasy. It's not that the players are bad, it's that you get, you don't get the advantageous targets, short area targets that are easier to be completed. You get less advantageous targets from that perspective. Deep down the field at times, it requires good quarterback play in both strength, arm talent and accuracy to be able to get the football there, as well as good scheming too at times. And so I do want to mention that he is and was used as a boundary X wide receiver. That being that he had a 5.7% slot percentage and then a 94.3% out wide boundary snap percentage. And so he was used as a vertical X in this offense. And typically that is going to be the worst bet for us. There are going to be some outliers, and I'm going to say it right now. I think that this guy could be one of those outliers. Now, taking a look at his yards per out run, his 2.57 was tied for 35th. His PFF receiving grade of 80.1 was tied for 32nd. Now, he's not very good after the catch. He'll get what's in front of him, kind of like a lot of these bigger, taller receivers. That's what makes the guys that can do it after the catch, like, Brian Thomas last year, right? That's what makes those guys separate themselves even further. But once again, he had 4.0 yards after catch per reception, which is tied for 187th in the sample size, and he had 8 total missed tackles forced, which is tied for 105th. So Yak is not going to be a big part of his game, and the film is going to tell us that. He can break tackles, though, with physicality, and he's not, objectively terrible there. It's just, I don't think it's going to be his biggest strength, but he brings a lot of other things to the table here. Now, contested catch percentage. He's very inconsistent. He had a 47.1 contested catch percentage, which is 8 out of 17. That's a little bit lower than the general threshold of about 50% that we typically desire. But while I don't think he's the most physically dominant contested catch artist in this class, for instance, I don't think that it's bad enough to where I would really be that concerned. That's basically right at the threshold of 50%. But once again, we would like to see that higher, especially for somebody that's his size, so I do get that for sure. Now, taking a look at his production, he had 88 targets on the season. That's 7.3 per game. Solid for an X wide receiver at the collegiate level, and he was pretty efficient, hauling in 61 of those 88 targets for 5.1 a game. We have seen a couple of X receivers so far that were a little bit less efficient with that. Taking a look at his yards and yards per game, he had 1,006 on the season in 12 games. That's 83.8 per game. That's right up there with some of those top receivers. I believe Carnell Tate led the group in which I've done so far with about 88 per game, if I'm remembering correctly. So basically right up there. And he had 9 receiving touchdowns, which was 0.75 and rounds up to 0.8 per game in 12 total games played. And I want to give a special shout out to my Patreon members. Thank you to Big Hunt, SP, Mage Jack, Infamy MTG, AOYOB, The Dawn, and Any Buckeye. Thank you guys. I'm doing this full time now, and without your support, this would not be possible. If you'd like to become a member, I'm going to leave a link in both the comment section and description of this video. You'll receive not only, but including access to a Discord where we have a channel where we have NFL and college football talk, as well as a channel where we have fantasy football talk, and a third channel where we laugh at poor trade offers that we've been offered in fantasy football. But if you'd like to, you can always DM me with private, questions if you don't wish for it to be known by any community members. But you'll also get help with building your fantasy football teams every year. I'll use wins above replacement, as well as just looking at the general lineup and scoring settings to help you with your teams each year. I'll help you with trades that are advantageous based on those factors as well. You'll be part of a fun and growing active community. You'll not only receive access to videos early guaranteed, but you'll also have the ability to ask for personal videos that you and only you can view. Or potentially, if you'd like something to be shown on the channel, you'll have preferential treatment there as well. So please consider becoming a member. I'd really appreciate it. Let's get back to the video. And so while some all-22 clips display some of what I'm going to be mentioning here, I'm going to read you a brief synopsis of his strengths and areas to potentially improve. And so Chris is a redshirt junior out of Tennessee who projects to be a vertical X at the NFL level. He stands at 6'5" and 200 pounds and will be a dangerous player at the next level, assuming he goes to a quarterback with, a landing spot with a quarterback with the arm talent and accuracy to be able to use a vertical X. I do think that he could probably see some slot work and potentially a little bit of work at Z, but I do think he's going to be more of your primary X with some slot work than necessarily a Z at the NFL level, if I'm being real with you. His burst off the line is absolutely diabolical, which he combines with insane deep speed, courtesy of his long strides. He combines that with adequate enough snap down on curls and comebacks and hitches to be able to be a dangerous vertical playmaker. Defenses are going to have to respect that deep speed, and his snap down is going to allow him to be able to get those underneath catches. I could also see him being used on on slants and other routes as well. I don't think he's going to be purely limited to the bones of the vertical X route tree. I think he could be more well-rounded. He can also be a crafty route runner at the same time, working into defenders' blind spots and creating separation well, albeit he can be a little bit handsy at times, creating separations with push-offs that could be called OPIs at the next level, so that will need to be cleaned up. His agility and just fluidity isn't necessarily the best out of all the wide receivers, but he's also doing this once again at 6'5" and 200 pounds. But he has beautiful ball tracking ability that he pairs with unique body control for his size, which, once again, combined with his deep speed and burst, allows him to be deadly down the field. He is also above average against press, and he does this by varying his releases, and there are plenty of it at his disposal, combined with swats and punches that are generally effective. Now, he does need to get even more consistent against press because when he does miss, he gets inhibited from entering his route phase, and obviously you need to be consistent against press if you're going to be an X at the NFL level. And so, that's fair and makes sense. He also needs to work on his contested catches, as he at times does body catch instead of snatching it out the air, which I think led to him having a 47% contested catch percentage, which, by no means is terrible. We typically want to see about 50%, so that's pretty much right there. But he could have been much better for somebody of his size. And I kind of think of it like a Brian Thomas thing where, Brian Thomas, to be fair to him, has displayed at the NFL level the ability to go up and snatch a football. If you watched my end-of-season film review of Brian Thomas after his rookie season, he was doing that quite well, albeit with, some bobbles here and there. But the cradle catch that we saw consistently at the collegiate level at LSU for him was somewhat refined going into his rookie season, especially as he progressed throughout it. But getting back to Brazzell, he will likely not be a great yak guy, and I think that's something that distinguishes him from Brian Thomas, by the way, because he does not have a ton of agility and make you miss ability. But, to be fair to him, he will get what's in front of him in a straight line. If he's even, he's leaving. So, if he has, a straight line to the end zone, you're probably just not going to catch this guy. But he can also break tackles with physicality. He is a bigger receiver. I just don't think that's ever going to be one of the bigger parts of his game. But overall, I'm very high on him, and while I typically am lower on boundary receivers due to the role, I think he has the prerequisites to be a dangerous receiver at the NFL level. And so this is going to be one of these guys that I think landing spot matters more for him and generally any boundary X type than any of the other receivers in this class. But I implore you to really take a look at this guy because I think he is way more talented than the production is telling us at this current time. Now, moving on to his projected IRL draft capital, he's projected to be a mid-first per NFL draft buzz, and I think he's going to test well at the combine, which shouldn't matter as much, but NFL teams will care substantially about that. But I do think that he is worthy of a mid-first, and it wouldn't shock me if, depending on how well he tests, if he potentially rises up even more than that. Once again, going over his strengths and areas to potentially improve upon. His speed and burst cannot be taught. It's quite impressive for somebody his size, but he pairs that with remarkable body control deep down the field and ball tracking ability to get to the football. I don't think his vertical jump is necessarily the best, but once again, he's so much taller that I think that kind of makes up for that to a degree. But you combine the speed and burst with the body control and ball tracking ability, but he's also crafty in terms of varying his releases, and he's pretty decent when he's successful against press coverage. Now, the thing is, when he misses a jam, for instance, or he misses a club, he can get kind of stopped into getting into his route phase. So he does need to get more consistent against press coverage, but I have seen him dominantly win there. And so I think just with more consistency, he'll be just fine there. Now, he can be a little bit too reliant on physicality. In terms of creating separation underneath, at times he'll kind of push people away, which, depending on how obvious or not obvious you are with that, you can get away with it, but you might get some, offensive pass interferences on that. But I would like to see him because, his snap down for somebody his size on those curls and comebacks is pretty solid. So I think the, vertical X route tree is well within his wheelhouse. Basically the entirety of that, I would not worry personally. But I would like to see, on those digs, I would like to see him less so use physicality to create separation and more so just being able to try to get there with some lateral agility. But the lateral agility for, it isn't remarkable. So that is going to be one thing that I'm not sure how much better he's going to be able to get there. And once again, his yak ability kind of goes hand in hand with the lack of agility at times. He's just really big, has long strides, and he just doesn't have that same kind of running back skill set that some of these other shorter guys do. And so I think he's just going to get what's in front of him. I think he can break some tackles with physicality, but I don't think he's going to be juking people, and I don't think he's going to be a tremendous yak threat at the NFL level. Now, moving on to my pro comparison for him, I don't like to use this comp because it's really hard for somebody to be this good, but I really do think that he could potentially be Mike Evans at the NFL level, but with 4.4 speed and potentially low 4.4 speed. Mike Evans was, I believe, a 4.55, 4.51, somewhere around there, which, I care a lot more about, IRL speed than, how you run in a straight line in underwear at the combine personally. But in terms of the 4.4 speed, I think that's like on the field speed. And he just has the ability to win against press so easily, contort his body quite well, catch contested balls, which I would like to see the consistency improve, but he does have dominant wins there. He skies over people, and he is just so hard to stop getting vertically like Mike Evans is, even at this age. I mean, you can tell Mike Evans has lost a step, but it's still really hard to stop this guy. I mean, he put up over 125 yards this last week coming back from injury. I really think that with the size, the ability to beat press down the field, the ball tracking ability, the contested catch ability, which I once again would like to see be a little bit more consistent, I do think that he could reach a ceiling of Mike Evans, and I'm going to be higher on this guy than probably any other boundary-specific type of wide receiver, and I would like to see him get a lot more slot work. I think that could be within his wheelhouse. But yeah, this is going to be one of those rare circumstances where I really, really, really like a boundary type of wide receiver. Now, in terms of where I think he'll probably be projected to, in terms of community ranking, if he does get, mid first round draft capital and doesn't go to just one of these terrible landing spot behind a bunch of other talent at wide receiver, I think he'll probably be valued in the wide receiver 30 to 40 range, potentially a little bit higher. Now, where would I personally take this guy? Once again, it's really hard to say now because we don't know the landing spot. We don't know, in terms of both the team and the overall value of where he was selected. It's hard to say right now, but I am going to be higher on this guy, I think, than a lot of people are, and I'm going to have him as an early to mid round 1 pick. Once again, if he goes to a terrible landing spot, that'll probably dip a little bit because I do think that situation matters quite a bit. People always say talent over situation. I do agree to an extent if somebody is just drastically more talented than another player. I could definitely understand that, but I do think that situation is going to matter quite a bit with basically all of these prospects, as it does with just about anybody. We've seen Justin Jefferson get erased, and I didn't think that was possible, but J.J. McCarthy found a way. But assuming he doesn't go to a terrible landing spot and does get mid first round draft capital, I'm going to be taking him in the early to mid first range. Probably I'll go over where I have some of these receivers ranked so far now that I have enough of a list to really have it matter to a degree. But potential fits, I think the Rams 10th overall via Atlanta. I think that's on the high end of where I think he could be taken. But with Devontae Adams getting a little bit older, they could look to replace the X receiver in this offense. And I think that would be a perfect fit for him. I think the Bucs at 19th overall, once again, replacing a player that I think he compares to well in Mike Evans, who's 32 and potentially going to retire after the season, given that his 1,000-yard streak ended, or is certainly likely to end, assuming he doesn't have 300 yards every game now. I think that's a potential fit. I think the Bills at 24th overall, I think this guy could be a very good X receiver with Josh Allen, win down the field. be a true number one at the NFL level with the Bills and Josh Allen. And I think the Patriots at 29th overall, if they want to move, Kayshon Boutte more towards, a Z or potentially a slot to split time with Demario Douglas, I think this guy could be an X. And with Drake May's accuracy, especially his deep ball, it's quite good. I think that Brazzell could definitely eat in this environment. Now, moving on to my current rookie wide receiver rankings. Please understand that this list is likely to change. We don't have athletic testing. We don't have, real life draft capital as well as team fit yet. So there is going to be a lot that changes here, most likely. But I think I've done enough receiver breakdown so far to kind of have a tiered list to a degree so far. And so as of right now, I think that Jordan Tyson, who I comped to Stephon Diggs, / Jerry Jeudy, more so with the route running of Jeudy, but with the explosive and multi-dimensional upside of Stephon Diggs, I think he's still going to be my number one receiver. But I think that Brazzell is going to be in that same tier at tier 1. I think this guy is much more likely to hit his high end of outcomes than I think some of these other guys are. And I'm sure there's going to be plenty of disagreement here, but I really do think that this guy could be Mike Evans at the NFL level, but with better speed. I think Mekhi Lemon, who I like a ton, and comped him to a little bit less bursty of Luther Burden. And Burden's really coming on now that he's allowed to actually produce. He was getting Rome Odunze, funnily enough, at the beginning of this season. I think the athleticism is going to keep him from being as dominant as somebody with his skill set could potentially be, but I think he's one of the highest floor receivers being Lemon here, and I think he's going to be really good. Carnell Tate, somebody that I comp to a little bit like, T. Higgins if he plays X, for instance. I think he is going to be a solid player at the NFL level. I think that I like Brazzell's athleticism significantly more while having a relatively similar skill set. And I don't think that Brazzell is as good of a route runner as Carnell Tate is, but I think he's still a pretty good route runner. And I think that you just can't teach the difference in speed. I think Denzel Boston also has a ton of upside, and I think that he is going to be a solid first-round pick for us in fantasy. I think that Casey Concepcion, I really like him. He is probably one of the tougher guys to rank here because if he goes to a really good landing spot, I could see him rising tremendously up these rankings. And so once again, and these are tiered. So if you had KC as your wide receiver 3, I wouldn't even disagree with you personally. I think this receiver class is a lot better than I expected it to be. But I just don't think there are any clear generational type of prospects like we had with, Jamar Chase, like we had with Marvin Harrison, even though Harrison hasn't worked out as much at the NFL level. And that's another thing I want to mention is just because somebody, is a generational prospect or this or that has no bearing on what their actual outcome is going to be. You can have somebody like Puka Nacua who went under the radar a little bit due to injury history and just not remarkable combine testing, who's turned out to be really, really good. So any one of these receivers could be better than any of the other ones. And finally, I have Nick Harbor in tier 3. I think he's going to drop down to a tier 4 once I get to enough prospects to really be able to rank them. With Nick Harbor, it was more so the athleticism. If this was just purely athleticism, he would be number 1. No doubt about it. Ridiculous deep speed. He's 6'5", basically just like Brazzell is, but he's like 235 pounds doing that with probably better deep speed. But with Harbor, the route running just is not where it needs to be. The consistency against press is not where it needs to be. He has much more significant drop issues than anyone else in this class, in my opinion. And while the upside, I think, is potentially DK Metcalf, I think the floor is somebody like Dante Thornton, who Brazzell also went to Tennessee with him, right? So I really like these wide receivers this year. I think they're a lot better than I figured they were going to be. I don't think there are any of those top tiered prospects, but I do think that this class isn't getting the praise that it deserves as far as the wide receivers are concerned. And I'm curious what you guys think. Let me know below kind of your tiered rankings of wide receivers. And I probably haven't gone through enough of them to have some of these guys properly ranked, in my opinion. And so, yeah, where do you agree? Where do you disagree? I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of comments on this video. But I'm just going to be honest with you. I am really high on this guy. I loved his tape. I see so much upside, and I think he has the prerequisite skills to be a very good X receiver. Now, he could definitely fall a little bit if he goes to a poor landing spot, as is with any of these prospects. But I really would encourage you to look closely at this guy. I think he's going to be pretty good as long as he doesn't go to basically the worst landing spot imaginable. But if you appreciate this work, if you would subscribe to my Patreon, I'd be eternally grateful. Thank you to my Patreon members. I'm doing this full time now, and without you guys and your support, this would not be possible. If you do not wish to or cannot afford to, if you could just like the video, subscribe to the channel, potentially leave a comment below with your wide receiver rankings, I would really appreciate it. Anyways, thanks and have a good day.